right, guys, thank you so much for coming out today. The College Republicans are so fortunate to be able to host Tom Palmer once again here. For those of you who don't know, Tom holds several key executive positions at a bunch of different places. He's a senior fellow at the Cato Institute. He's vice president for international programs at the Atlas Economic Research Foundation. And he's also general director at the Atlas Global Initiative for Free Trade, Peace, and Prosperity. Last year, Tom spoke on the second installment of the What Your Professors Won't Tell You series. The book was called Morality of Capitalism. It was an awesome event, awesome book. And tonight he's going to be speaking about the third installment called After the Welfare State. Now this book holds a collection of essays basically showing how the welfare state has destroyed economies worldwide and destroyed so many opportunities and futures for the youth of the country. We're really excited to hear Tom's perspective on the subject, so please help me welcome Tom Palmer.
Thank you, Julia. It's always nice to be in Portland. This is such a beautiful part of the world. I was out earlier today debating with an advocate of the welfare state, a very robust advocate, his plan for universal national service. Another part of welfare state mentality, that everyone should be compelled to serve the state, and through the state, the nation. Interestingly enough, his presentation was a voluntary path to universal service. I said this made no sense at all. If it's going to be universal, it's because it has to be compulsory, but even compulsory is never universal because clever, articulate people always find ways to evade these things, as now Vice President Biden, as we know, did find 5 draft deferments during the Vietnam War, and then finally medical deferments. Bill Clinton and most of the other advocates of these service systems managed somehow never to serve themselves, but now that they're old and gray, it's your turn. I just finished up a trip around the world, much of it talking about the welfare state. 30 days on the road, was in 5 cities of Australia, where they're having a very robust discussion right now about the future of Australian society. Their welfare state there is not quite as large as it is in our country, many other countries, but they understand the direction that they're going, and as I explained, they're about 20 years behind Greece, and that should focus one's attention on the direction that they're going, and they have an opportunity to fix that. I want to look at the welfare state through a couple of different lenses, through historical, political science, as well as philosophical and economic approaches. We can see that the welfare states around the world has become one of the dominant modes of state involvement in the society and economy. It goes by many, many different names. The first one there, I'll talk a bit more, the Sozialstaat. Maybe this originated in Germany. It's nearly everywhere now, and you find that this mode of organization has really colonized much of the surface of the planet, a great deal of political space. And the reason is it creates advantages for rulers, and it creates political constituencies for its continuation. A lot of the discussion of the welfare state focuses on the idea that it's somehow just an expression of benevolence. That before, in the past, people were not nice, and then they became nice, and then we got a welfare state. And that's about the depth of the analysis. I think we have to look a lot deeper and think at it from the perspective of a political science. We can think about what's happening right now as a tragedy of the commons. We're seeing the exhaustion in many countries. Europe, the United States is not very far behind. The exhaustion of a commons. If you think about this concept of the tragedy of the commons from economics, it's very, very helpful to understand overuse of resources. This is a big issue as an ecological crisis in much of the world. Massive overfishing. And the reason is, if I don't catch the fish, somebody else is going to catch the fish. There's no property rights that allows anyone to exclude it, so I have no guarantee I'll be able to catch that fish in 6 months or 2 years, or the offspring of that fish if it's allowed to survive and reproduce, and consequently massive overfishing. And actually, This is a serious ecological crisis in many parts of the world, and we don't know what the solution is to it. The solution is a property rights solution. Allow people to own the fish, exclude others from taking the fish, and that means that a fish in 10 years has a value today. Something in economics or finance called the present value equation. The value of any current capital resource is equal to the sum of all the future rents it will generate discounted by the rate of interest. Think about mortgage payments. If you borrow the money, you're going to be paying over all of those years. A future sum of money has a present value. If, on the other hand, I can't exclude you, and I can't be sure there's going to be fish there in 2 years, I have no incentive to conserve them. And that's a problem that we see in a lot of areas, and the solution that's been implemented in offshore waters of Canada, in part of the Chesapeake Bay with oysters, and in the offshore waters of Iceland and New Zealand is property rights. Some system to allow people to capture that value, so fish in 50 years have a value today, and people will therefore refrain from catching them all. Well, we have the same problem right now with the state and its ability to hand out subsidies. If I don't go and qualify for that subsidy, it's not going to cause my taxes to go down. I won't reap any additional benefit from that. Somebody else is going to go and get that subsidy instead. All of us face that problem. And so we all have an incentive to qualify for whatever subsidies or handouts we can qualify for. They come in many, many different forms. Everybody is looking to get something for nothing, if you will, from the state. If we look at the history of this, the most important figure in the development of this system, this snappy fashion model from Central Europe, Otto von Bismarck, who was the German Iron Chancellor, the man who brought about the unification of the German state under what was called the Second Reich. The First Reich, think about Charlemagne, the second under Emperor Wilhelm, and Otto von Bismarck. And part of his process of what we would today call nation building was the creation of a welfare state system. Prior to this time, the Germans had been living under a multitude of different states and countries, if you will. He unified them, first going to war with Austria and conquering and taking from Austria Silesia, and then war with France, the Franco-Prussian War, defeating the French and using this to unify the German states outside of Switzerland and Austria, which were German states that were not part of it. And part of that was to create a feeling of patriotism for the German state as such. Because prior to this time, people thought of themselves as Bavarians, or Saxons, or Prussians, or Rhinelanders, or whatever, as citizens of these different German-speaking states. And from now on, he wanted everyone to see himself or herself as a German, and focused on the German state with its new capital in Berlin. A part of this was a creation of a system of compulsory state benefits, state unemployment compensation, and accident insurance that would be administered by the state. And as he put it very nicely, whoever has a pension for his old age is far more content, far easier to handle than one who has no such prospect. And pension in this context, he did not mean a private pension, he meant a state pension. He was very clear on this, that you would be dependent on the state, and you would look to the state for these variety of benefits for your old age. As every soldier, he said, receives a pension for his service to the emperor and the state, every worker will receive a pension for his service to the state as well. So this nation building, this building of nationalism, was carried out many different ways, militarism and parades, and, national song and so on. But this is one way to tie people, to make them dependent on the state. The German liberals, and when I use liberal, I don't mean Vice President Biden's philosophy or Hillary Clinton's philosophy, but what is called real liberalism around the world, a belief in limited government, personal responsibility, in the market economy, in freedom of trade, in religious toleration and freedom, and so on. Today we would call this libertarianism, or in academic context, classical liberalism. But in most of the world, it's just called liberalism. It still has the meaning than it had in previous centuries. And in the United States, it changed in meaning. So, but when I say liberalism, everyone should understand I'm talking about the philosophy of limited government and personal freedom. The German liberals opposed him, great men such as Eugen Richter and Ludwig Bamberger, and they said, you will create of the German people a nation of helots. The helots were the most degraded slaves of the Spartans, the true state of enslavement. And what they preferred instead was what we would today call systems of individually capitalized retirement accounts, where you saved money for your future and it belonged to you. It was yours. And you could retire with dignity and with the ownership of your capital. You could draw an income from it in the form of an annuity, or you could use it to buy a house, education, whatever you wanted. It was going to be yours. Instead, what Bismarck proposed was drop, receiving a payment from the state, but no capital, no ownership of the capital that had been accumulated because of your savings. And it was done for very strong political reasons. He wanted people to be dependent on the state. We can think about different kinds of states and systems. Sometimes people refer to the welfare state as socialistic. I think it's a little bit of a mistake. A socialist state has as its ambition the subjugation of all of society to a conscious and rational plan. And what the Marxists and other socialists believed was that a higher form of freedom would be realized by doing that. The idea was that so-called bourgeois or liberal freedom was personal freedom to run your own life, to worship God as you wanted, to follow your own conscience, and so on. That was a kind of false or empty freedom. The true freedom was freedom as a collectivity. In his essay on the Jewish question, Karl Marx says that man is a species being. He exists through the species, through the form or the collectivity. The individual, in effect, is what we would say epiphenomenal, the foam on the surface of the sea, not real in some important sense. What was real was the collectivity. And it was the collectivity that experienced the true higher freedom, not liberal freedom, which is based on rights. He argued that separates people, but true collective freedom. And we would exercise this freedom by planning our future. We'll plan the economy. Later we had to think of central planning of the economic sphere, but also to plan science, technology, to free mankind from any external forms, including religion. That religion was to be abolished and wiped away because God is perceived in religion as somehow external to man, something before which we stand. Instead, as Marx believed, God was merely a projection of our own humanity that we'd externalized. So religion was to be abolished, and we would make everything subject to our conscious control. And in that way, realize a true freedom, a higher freedom. And you can see that people who were swept up into this were willing to do a lot of things that we would consider horrifying and criminal to realize what they considered this higher freedom. Killing, murder, extermination of whole classes of persons, executions, slave labor camps, and so on, which was the legacy of communism and other systems similar to that. The welfare state, in contrast, is much more modest. It's statist, but it does not seek to consciously plan all of society. It's compatible with having a basically market economy. It's compatible with fundamental recognition of freedom of religion. What it means is that the state takes responsibility for your welfare, which means your well-being. It lifts from your shoulders the burdens of responsibility for taking care of your old age, for saving, for making decisions about medical care, and so on.